Hello, and welcome to Enlightened Empaths, your community for the spiritually awakened. Today, we're going to be discussing how to discover and embrace your true calling with our guest, Rick Jarow. I first listened to the Ultimate Anti-Career Guide last year, and I've listened to it again at least twice this summer. Then I moved on to The Alchemy of Abundance and Creating the Work You Love, and finally, I emailed Mr. Jarow and basically begged him to be on our show. Rick is the pioneer of the anti-career movement. At age 19, he left Harvard University and traveled for 7 years throughout Europe and India, which he recounts in his first book, In Search of the Sacred. In India, he became initiated into the yogic disciplines and meditational arts. At 26, he returned to the West to complete a doctoral program at Columbia University, where he received a PhD in Indian languages and literature. Currently, he teaches at Vassar and travels the world presenting workshops such as Creating the Work You Love and The Alchemy of Abundance, among others. His books include The Ultimate Anti-Career Guide, Creating the Work You Love, and the Advanced Manifestation Program. So welcome, welcome, welcome. We are so excited and honored to have you here. I have to start. So my oldest daughter just left for college. My second daughter's getting ready for the SAT and that whole college applying process.
Oh, okay.
Now, I could only imagine what it takes to get to Harvard. So I would love for you to start us off by taking us back to your 19-year-old self and the courage it took to walk away from that huge achievement.
Well, since I'm looking at it through a lens of decades, I don't see it as courage at all. I don't see it. I don't see it as anything other than what could have happened. That's just how I see it. I feel that every soul, in a human body, has a destiny. And I see that that destiny is not the same thing as fate. Fate is something you resign to, where destiny you step up and meet it. So maybe I did something like that. As I've written in a number of places, I think one of the things that can give us courage and vision is not necessarily a formal mentor. I don't know if one has to go in that direction, but connecting with somebody who perhaps has gone through the door that you're thinking of going through, and seeing that possibility, I think, gives you the opening. In my case, it was my meeting with Ram Dass at Harvard that kind of opened that door for me to see what is possible. And interestingly enough, in order to close the loop, it was very important for me. A few years ago, I just said, I have to go and connect with Ram Dass again before one of us leaves. And I was very fortunate to get to see him in Hawaii. And once again, it was a situation where there had to be some type of, one of a better word, higher force at work that enabled me to get there and meet him. Long story short.
Wow, what a beautiful full circle moment.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
once again, listeners, this is why you need pen and paper, because just even how you describe the difference between fate and destiny, I love that. Fate is something you're resigned to, and destiny is something you rise up to and meet. That's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Throughout your work on your website and in your book, you bring in a lot of different philosophies, excuse me, and practices. And there was one quote that I read that absolutely touched my heart, because you said, "This is true abundance, to cower before no one and no thing, to honor the life we've been given, and to dare to open to our fullness." And when I read that, it seemed so indicative of what people are struggling with right now. And our community are empaths, highly sensitive people, and trying to find out where is my path taking me? Where am I going? How do I step into this and step away from the either self-imposed, societally imposed restrictions, and just do what I want to do and raise my vibration?
Yeah. Yeah. Mm.
And I think you, at one part, you had talked about there are 7 major passages we all go through. And if you could talk about that a little bit, that would be fantastic.
You have to give me the first one because I don't even remember.
it's it's about the connections with the planetary and how each one impacts the different parts of our lives, and seven-year
Yeah.
cycles. And
Yeah, I did that. That was a piece. I'm still doing it actually because it speaks to people. I use the planetary cycles as more than metaphors, as kind of, again, doorways into understanding perhaps where I am and what I'm going through, and how can I make the best out of it. Because I was thinking about this when this morning, actually, when I was envisioning what this podcast might be like, and I was just noticing like how situations have changed, in society, not just since I started out, but every few years. And Hilda Charlton, one of my great mentors, used to have this. Her definition of alignment was being in the right place at the right time. So if you know, or you can sense or work with that, if you're in a Saturn cycle, it's about consolidation. It's not about expansion. And if you're in the 84-year Uranian cycle, it's about busting out, breaking loose, and so on and so forth. And this is true for the planet as well as individuals. I think the really important cycles are the ones that are metaphorically related to outer planets. So one way of I look at it is, if you go into a hospital and just observe, a hospital only functions if specific people are playing specific roles. So in any hospital, if you look hard enough and are lucky enough, you usually find at least one, usually more angels. Could be a nurse, could be a secretary, but it's like they're planted there just to give hopeless people hope. And that, if you're currently thinking about being employed as an angel, that's the Neptune cycle. And the Pluto cycle, which some people feel we're at, I don't personally, is when you realize that things have gotten so irrevocably damaged that you have to break the whole thing apart and start over. The Uranian cycles in your life are cycles when you are really ready to step out and be in front of the line. And the Saturn cycle, okay, consolidate what you've done, step back for a while and gain your strength. So again, the basic idea behind all this is flowing with the stream and not struggling against it.
that's beautiful, because it exemplifies our interconnectedness with the earth energy, with the planetary energy, but also with each other as humanity.
Yeah.
That's fabulous. Thank you.
One of the things we get from our listeners all the time is this feeling of, well, it's kind of a spectrum. A lot of our listeners are saying to us, we want to do work that's meaningful. We want to live our passion. We also want to pay our mortgage every month.
Right.
And then we have another set of listeners who have reached that echelon of success and all the labels and accolades that go along with it. And yet they say, I feel like an imposter, like I'm not really meant to be this successful.
Yeah. Well, that's so much that you're talking about. That's so, we can spend days on it. So I don't even know where to begin.
Well, I have a place I wanted to begin, if you
Okay,
don't
good.
mind.
Yeah, please.
So you wrote, if you don't have a passion, you have symptoms.
Right.
That just really spoke to me, because that is so true. You said you might have headaches or feel bored at work. So unpack this. Where are you bored in your work? What do you hate about your job? So
Exactly.
could you talk to those people who are on that side of the spectrum that are just clocking into work, paying their bills, coming home and doing it all over again the next day? And they're coming to us saying, I want so much more out of life, but I don't know what I'm passionate about. I don't know what I want.
Yeah. I guess I have to take myself to task here a little bit, because, when I wrote Creating the Work You Love, I was in a considerably different consciousness, in that I was thinking of meaningful work entirely as an individual process. And in hindsight, it's not. It depends on family, society, the weather. So it's not so much, and this idea like passion, it gets too easily skewed toward like the individual. So instead of the question of like, where's my passion or what's my passion, I think a more productive inquiry is something like, where and when do I feel fully alive? Now, maybe two sides of the same coin, I'm not sure. But what makes it happen is that becomes the first commitment. You can do a perfect quadratic, whatever, calculus equation, but if the first calculation is wrong, the whole thing is useless. And the first calculation that we've been conditioned to believe is, I have to become somebody, as opposed to, I already am somebody. And that's what I call abundance. And that's where it all begins. The willingness to live the life you've been given, not strive to try to be somebody else, and to fully embrace yourself and your world and let the work flow out of that. Most of us go out to look for work because we're afraid of starving or not having, these are real fears. They're not just illusions. They're coming from millions of years of human and animal conditioning. But the Eastern teachings, for example, tell us that the human life is an opportunity to break out of that cycle. So I think the first commitment is to your aliveness and your joy. And the faith is that the appropriate livelihood grows out of that. Now, that's a lot different. I'm not saying committing to, I want to play the gong on Thursdays, in the basement. There is a give and take, but it's the commitment to what makes me fully alive.
Yeah, that's so important. And just finding those moments, I think, in each day where you feel fully alive, whatever that moment might be, without judging it. I used to write a column called Earth Angels where I would just find local people who were doing, nice things. And this one man I interviewed, I'll never forget, he was fourth generation mail service carrier. And
Mm-hmm.
he had gotten a scholarship to college and, he was a very, very smart man, but he spent his life delivering the mail.
Yeah.
And he said, I couldn't do anything more because I was afraid of crossing a class line and my family wouldn't understand me.
Right. Right.
When I met him, he was retired and he spent his days building birdhouses.
Wow.
And he drove all over the Southeast, nailing these birdhouses throughout the woods so they could have homes. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought, no matter where we go or what we do in life, we're going to find a way to explore our passion.
That's interesting. There's been for a long time, it's been out, a really interesting book by, I think his name is Stephen Hyde, called The Gift. And it's an anthropological study of basically work in different cultures. And he makes a distinction between gift cultures and utilitarian cultures, such as ours. But kind of riffing on that, I got this sense that, and experience, working with so many people, that it's not an either or situation. For some people, doing the one thing they love from day one and making money from it is great and it's a way to go. But for other people, that becomes a death trap. Whereas for some people, rendering onto Caesar what belongs to Caesar and then taking the time to do your art or your own thing, that can work just as well or even better on some occasions. So I see it as an individual alignment process. But your first commitment has to be to your joy, your truth, your abundance, and not your fear that what's going to happen to me if I don't toe the line, so to speak.
I absolutely love that. And also in your book, I actually giggled when I read it because you made a comment about manifestation is not about wishing, hoping, praying, but knowing how to produce what
Right.
you need to actualize your dreams in the physical world.
Yeah.
And I feel like we can read that, we can, watch the videos, we can go to the workshops, but until we can internalize that, and if you could talk about manifestation for a bit, because you explain it from such a different light, and I think that would help a lot of our listeners who are trying so hard to bring into their lives and step into their authenticity and truth, but they're a little hung up on how do I do that? How do I allow myself to step up into that?
Well, I thank you. It's a great question, and I'll begin with an anecdote that taught me a lot, which is one decades ago. I was in India visiting the great yogi Ram Sarat Kumar, who lived in Tiruvannamalai, Ramana Maharshi's town. And I'd gone to the temple before I went to visit him. And sometimes, if you go to a temple in India and you give donation, they give you a garland back that's been offered to the deity. So I had this garland, and I kind of thoughtlessly stuffed it in my bag. And I went to see the yogi with a list of about 10 questions. Things like, is there fate or free will? Is the world going to survive? And I came there with my list of questions, and the only thing he wanted to know is, what's in the bag? What's in the bag? What's in the bag? And I realized, oh my God, if I can't even respect this flower garland, how can I deal with the bigger questions?
Mm-hmm.
So manifestation, I find, works from the micro level. How you clean up the kitchen. How you. When my son was 6 years old, it was Sunday morning. I walked in. He was late. He had gotten up finally, and I said, "Hey, Oshan, do you think you should make your bed already?" And he looked at me, turned around. He said, "Well, if it's just going to get unmade again, why should I make it?" And that's a really good question. I mean, there's some people in certain cultures they really kind of live that way. But why should you do anything? And aside from the fact that you're forced to by the laws of nature. So I think manifestation begins in the micro by doing the little things, and then the yin side is paying attention, and the yang side is honoring the attention. That if something or someone speaks to you, you go for it. You don't stay in a circumscribed around fear or ideas of who I am. There was a beautiful book written many years ago called The Magus of Strovolos, The Extraordinary World of a Spiritual Healer, about this spiritual healer who lived in Cyprus. Kyriakos Markides wrote it. And lots of people read that book, I don't know, 80s, 90s, but one particular person I know, he read that book and he was so moved, he said, I'm going to find him. And he was like on the next plane to Cyprus. And that's manifestation. It's you pay attention to what affects you, and then you move on it. And that, to me, that's what makes things happen, when those two things, the yin and the yang will, are working together. You start micro, see what attracts your attention, and then really respond to it. I didn't move into my life thinking about writing a book, creating the work you love, or doing an anti-career guide. They never even thought about that. I was working with people, and I noticed everybody I worked with had seemed to me vocational issue, and it really impacted me. And so then you follow that impact. That's a lot different than saying, "Oh, I think I would like to have this."
Mm-hmm.
You see, when you say, "I think I would like to have this," that's it. The imagination can take you places, but it doesn't hit the core. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and then when it does work, you find out it's not what you really wanted anyway. But when it's from your core, like this, I'm willing to bet my life on this. Like it's that important. Then that moves things and people into action. And as I've mentioned in a few places, it is the strength of your commitment that brings in the allies, the beings who are karmically contracted to help you. So that's probably a good place to stop and see what you have to say about it.
Very cool. Thank you.
I think that's perfect. Now, all of this leads me to my big question I have for you. so I was not raised in a home with unconditional love. I was raised with you get good grades, you make your bed, you will
Right.
get love. Even I was mentioning to you before we recorded, I'm taking care of my parents, and I brought dinner to my mom last night, and she said, "What do I owe you for the meal?"
Wow. Oh
I was
my.
like,
Wow.
"Mom, I cooked you a meal."
Wow.
So I was raised in this whole thing of, there's always an equal exchange of give and take. And
Right.
so
Right.
all of that has led me to be not a workaholic because I feel I have a pretty good balance, but I do have this compulsion always that I have to be producing, I have to be doing
Yeah.
in
That's a
order
really good one.
to
Yeah.
feel worthwhile, or that I'm
Yeah.
being the light and being of service.
Yeah.
And yet you wrote the most powerful thing you can do to extend your career is nothing.
Right.
I just want you to know I wrote that down and it's hanging up on my bathroom mirror.
The late great, in my opinion, I consider him a mentor, James Hillman, who wrote his book, The Soul's Code. The whole book is an argument against the belief that family is destiny. Family and conditioning are certainly what we're born into, and they're parts of our destiny. But there's another part of us. Hillman would refer back to the Greek daimon, the guardian spirit, that brings us to the people and places we need to grow into our fullness. And my experience is most of us don't get that from our families. It's kind of impossible. Where it comes from is often the mentor. And the mentor can come in many different forms, but it's someone that recognizes something in you that your family could not. And that opens a door for you. And that's why initiating adults are so important. It's so important in this country, in this world, that we have women and men who are enough, into themselves that they can initiate others into these possibilities. I had no one in my family who wrote books. Like, that wasn't on their radar. And when I came back from India and wound up going to college just to see what it would be like, this English teacher wrote on one of my papers, she wrote on the bottom, and she said, "You have at least 3 books in you. Start writing."
Wow.
That's a mentor. That opened the door for me. Now, and that's what I mean by, okay, I got the mess. She gave me the message, but I had to take it to heart and do something about it. But I say to people, the great question is, to break out of the conditioning is, who inspires you, and can you invent some cool ways to hang out with them? Doesn't matter who they are, when they lived, what they do. If they inspire you, there's some kind of karmic link that can empower you. So, in other cultures, they literally have, initiating gurus who give you new names, like symbolic of a new birth. The other way to go, which is interesting, there's another way to work this, which is you go backward. Instead of looking ahead for a mentor, you can go backward into your family history. And sometimes you'll find someone 2, 3 generations back who did something that actually makes sense to you, and that kind of reestablishes a link.
I think that's really important. You write about that in your chapter on second chakra work,
Right,
about
right,
calling on your ancestors and
right.
finding stories, anything that can inspire you,
Yeah,
and leaning into them for support.
yeah.
Now, I have a funny story about that. So I did that a long time ago. My dad's grandmother got on the boat to come here from Ireland with 6 children, and
Mm.
her husband stepped off the boat to literally get a pack of cigarettes and never came back.
Wow, wow,
So she came to America alone with six
wow,
kids. The oldest was my grandfather, who was 12,
wow.
and she opened up a candy store in Brooklyn.
Mm,
So for years, whenever I would be just unsure or nervous or needed strength, I'd call on that great grandmother and say, if you came to America alone and did it, you
mm.
got to help me.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
was telling my dad that story about a decade ago, and he was like, "Oh, well, my grandfather actually met her back in America 10 years later, and she took him back.
Where in Brooklyn was the candy store?
I can't remember. It was called Washington Candies, I think. So it's got to be, I need to find it. The candy store is no longer there, but my dad has a picture of it. And I thought, she took him back? How could she? That ruined my whole independent spirit woman. But I still call on her because she still did it. And I think that's a good point. And you mentioned in your book, even if these family members weren't loving and supportive of you, on some karmic level, they do love you and support you and want the best for you. And I truly believe that's
You know,
absolutely correct.
I've recently had incredible experience of this because, as I told you, I think before we started, my mother recently passed, and being part of that process, being able to be deeply in that process with her, especially the couple of weeks after she died, I realized I experienced this light being, loving, compassionate aspect of my mother that I had not really experienced in the same way on Earth. Maybe the last couple of years, and at first I was taking myself to task. Why couldn't you see this? Why did you get fooled by the personality? Because the personality, by definition, is a mask that we fall for. So to be able to look and see the light, I mean, it's a cliche, but when you feel it and see it, that no matter what anyone's done, and more importantly, no matter what you've done, no matter what you thought, in an instant, that can completely transfigure. Paul on the way to Damascus. And that it challenges the notion that I have to work hard and I have to do this, I have to do that. It's flipping the vibrational switch to a different frequency, and often that happens through trauma, loss, and love. They have opportunities there.
Yes, there's gifts to be found there. I had a powerful dream experience a couple of years ago. My mom, and I have a very difficult, interesting relationship. And I and I had this dream, and she and I were sitting outside at this cafe. This ocean was behind us, and she was holding my hands. And she's not a hand holder, she's not a hugger in real life. And in the dream, she's holding my hands, and she said, "How's this working for you, Samantha?" And I
Wow.
said, "It's
Wow.
it's working." And she said, "When you asked me to come as your mother and be a true bitch," she said, "I agreed because I knew it would help you and teach you the strength your soul is yearning to learn."
Yeah.
And she said, "But I didn't know it would be so hard for me."
Wow. Wow.
And I thought, oh my gosh. So what you just said about the personality being a mask, I think that's so true. And I'm really glad you had that gift of feeling your mom's love and light,
Yeah.
right at the end and beyond. That's
It was
beautiful.
an incredible gift. Yeah. And it brings something up for me, which I think we miss in the hyper individualized cultures we've created, which is that manifestation, abundance, meaningful work. These are by and large community issues. They're not just individual issues. If you want a new product, someone out there has to be interested in it, or your new project, or whatever. Which is why one of the three big career questions I always ask somebody is, who is your community, or what communities are you a part of? That's how work was early on created in the United States. Immigrants came over, their relatives were here and got them a job in the garment district, in the railroad, wherever. That's what the community did for you. And the meaning was not so much in the work itself, but in how you did it and who you did it with and what were all the relationships going on. And I have said on more than one occasion that I would rather sweep a floor in a place whose mission I believed in than be a CEO of Murder Incorporated, And I think it's, if you don't believe in the people you're working with or for, it's a misalignment, and it's going to come back to bite you. I've seen it many times. So The alignment is getting with the right people who can, you can each help each other with difficulties as well as with insight. It's all part of the package as far as I can see. Community is essential. People who inspire you is essential. And, it pains me to say this, but, the mission statement of the United States, which we still haven't lived up to, but the mission statement is life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, which is like this amazing situation, amazing vision where you have the right and the responsibility to develop your own relationship with spirit. And if you abdicate that, then it's easy to be colonized by the corporate world and all the other worlds.
That's so powerful and true.
And along that note, one of the things that I truly find more and more when I work with people, people want to feel that passion for their life, not only their career, but they want to live in a place of joy. They want to have something that they feel like they're making a difference. And that's been intensifying with, I want to make the most of my time left on the planet. Point
Right.
me in the right direction. What do you want me to do? And I think one of the things people get so hung up on is I'm too old or I'm too poor or I'm in the wrong part of the country. But you give some tips in your book about how to step away from that and really focus, because I really in my soul believe if you have a passion and a joy, if you want to write and no one reads it, you're still going to write. If you have a song to sing and no one and you're not performing on a stage, but you're gonna express that. So finding that passion, and it doesn't have to be over the top huge, but finding that, having what the ethic to say, I can't let this not come into fruition, and then how can I be of service or how can I help, whether it's on an individual, a societal, or a global level. I really think that's kind of the key, and the direction you take in your book with stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I would. My process has me to step back one step before the passion, because I think too many people misinterpret passion as what do I really want,
Mm-hmm.
and that puts all the heavy responsibility, the burden on me. This little point of light among 7.5 billion other points of light. Whereas if we begin with receiving every day as a gift, people want joy, people want, of course, because it's such a gift to be on this planet and to breathe this air and to see the sun up every morning. I read somewhere that after some, I don't know the exact event in his life, but the writer Ernest Hemingway decided that for the rest of his life, every morning he would be up to see the sunrise. You receive a gift like that, and then everything flowers. The passion happens, everything happens. And I would argue that if you have a desire to write, there's somebody who needs to read it. You may not see it, you may not know it. Emily Dickinson put her stuff in a little box, but there were people who needed to read that. So if there's something that's moving you, it means the world needs it. And I believe you said the key word to me, which is it's the passion or that energy. It remains locked in ego and frustration until it's offered in service. And when you offer it in service, when you say to yourself, to the universe, how can I serve? Then the avenue finds itself, and it doesn't matter the scale. It's the right scale that particular service needs to be. So receiving the gift, out of the gift comes the desire. This is how I want to say thank you. And then how can I serve with it? I see that as an unbeatable combination. And just to look at some second chakra stuff for a second, I believe that one reason so many do not receive every day as a gift is because we're operating so deeply on the pain body as a culture, and we're still not willing to look and see how all this happened. So we keep running and running and running, producing, and not looking at some of the basic things like what is my relationship to the land I'm standing on?
Perfect little snippet for that is years and years ago, I used to help my father on the lobster boat. And we'd go
Mhm.
out, and every once in a while, he'd just stop and he'd say, "Don't ever forget to appreciate what a beautiful day it is." And
Wow.
he'd
Wow.
point something out on the horizon, or he'd say,
Yeah.
"Look at the way that wave is." And it just gave me such a deep
Wow. Wow.
appreciation for
Wow.
nature and presence. And I think right now, with the polarity in the world, that's a key gift we can give ourselves is to be present.
It's tricky. Just as an interesting footnote, someone who had a very similar story to yours was Ralph Nader.
Oh,
Yeah, his parents would have him go to the store, and he'd come back with the groceries, and how much did this cost? How much did this cost? And then his mother would say, how much does the air you breathe cost? And just getting into that, that gift. And you mentioned the polarity that's happening. I honestly, I don't know. Like, I hope we haven't run off the cliff already. But I feel that the challenge of this moment is it's more important to be kind than to be right.
exactly.
Tell me if you guys agree with this. My goal has never been to be happy because I think that's a fleeting emotion. And so I do try to find the gift in each day, but I also try to find the gift in the painful moments of each day as well.
Yeah.
And you wrote about depression. You said that depression is something that leads us to abundance. And you,
Yes.
you talked about prosagnation and how, as a culture, we're so trained to just tamp that down. My grandfather, the one who was 12 on that boat and had to help support his family, this is his words of wisdom to me. He said, if anyone asks you how you are, tell them you're doing great no matter what, because no one really gives a damn.
I like that.
But I think that we have been taught as a culture to just kind of dampen down all the negative emotions and only put on the mask that's happy and joyful and bright and up. But you say, don't do that. Feel the feelings, feel the depression, the sadness, the anxiety of what's going on in the world, of what's going on within you, the angst, because there's a message there.
Yeah. Well, America's first great depth psychologist, William James, spoke early on, I think 1910, I don't know the exact date, about two different types of people. And he called them the sick soul and the healthy soul. And this was not a value judgment. This was like a style observation that some people's style, like he said, like Walt Whitman, is just, everything's happy and and happy go lucky. And then his sick-souled example was Leo Tolstoy, with the weight of the world on their shoulders. And William James' point was that each of these types, needs to be true to their experience. And some people, by nature, need to go through hell to get through heaven. And it's necessary. It's important. It's a deepening of wisdom. And I guess a very succinct way to put it would be the title of one of Pema Chodron's books, "The Wisdom of No Escape." Whatever your situation is, there's no escape, and I've seen it both ways. I've worked with a gentleman who he was born in what we would now call extreme privilege. He never had to work, and so he was his whole life. What should I do? What should I do? And it took him a long time to kind of break out of that and find something that really lit him up. He wound up touring hurricane sites and getting the driftwood and making furniture out of them. And it evolved into quite a business. So whatever you're given, my feeling is, my experience is, you need to fully embrace it to get its gift. Whether that's the sweet cup or the bitter cup, that depends on circumstances which are probably beyond our control. But yes, the cultural disconnect that says you should be happy while the world is burning does not make second, third chakras happily aligned.
No, and it doesn't lead to authentic choices either.
No. So maybe the issue is rewiring or reworking this word or this sense happiness. That happiness is derivative. It just comes when you're in your right place at your right time. And in the old days meaning I think it's the 80s, when I sat with Hilda Charlton in St. John the Divine's Cathedral, New York. It was a time in history where it was very fashionable to speak out against your parents, not to like your parents. And Hilda would often have someone come up in front of 300 people and start just emoting and going on and on about what their parents did to them, and they did this, that, and the other thing. And Hilda would wait until they were completely exhausted, and then she would turn to them and say, okay, kid, can you see how you grew through that? And that becomes, the insight. So there's a beautiful, I think it's a Rumi poem about the sheikh and the disciple who are walking through the desert, and the sheikh says, I know you're just thinking about figs and water, and don't worry, we're coming to an oasis pretty soon, and you'll get your figs, you'll get your water. It says, but the ones who are really, in deep with the beloved, they often starve. He said, but don't worry, it's not going to be you. So it's not that we look for suffering, but it is inevitable, and part of our soul making is how deeply we can process that and be with that and see how it polishes us into something shiny. And I'm not romanticizing it, but it's there. So
And to be present with it, to not ignore it.
really present, yeah. But I think there's a process about being present with it, and that is having the presence/abundance to be with it without falling prey to the reactions that come in the mind and the emotions. The reactive nature is going to keep going like a fan even when you pull the plug out. And that reactive nature likes to blame people and be nasty and upset. But it's not, when you see through it, it's not you, it's the conditioning. So you can watch that. Those reactions are not the depth of the situation. The late Bernie Glassman, who I brought to Vassar at one point, who used to initiate this Zen sitting at Auschwitz, talk about a challenge. And I remember reading a narrative of one woman who sat there for a couple of weeks and, going through all kinds of reactions and horror stories. And she said, toward the end, I realized, I felt in my heart what suffering the guards there were going through. To have to divorce your humanity to such a degree, and she could feel compassion for them. That's the presence, not staying in the reaction of you're a Nazi, you're a murderer, you're a racist, you're this, you're that. We love to label people, and I would argue that label is a form of reaction that gets you stuck.
That's a powerful story. To reach that level of compassion, it's a little beyond me at this moment, but that's amazing.
Yeah, it is. It really is. But what we all can do, I feel at this time, it's the most important thing, I believe, is to really work not to get caught up in labeling people. Whatever, you label them as right wing, left wing, anti vaxxer, pro this, these are not, it's a way of dehumanizing someone. Whenever you label someone, you're literally not seeing them, you're not connecting with them. You're just building your own wall of ego narrative. And the more labels we can let go of, the more light that's going to come in.
And it will enable you to peel off the layers you may have subconsciously placed on yourself,
Yeah.
which are so limiting.
And we all have them,
Yes.
but at least we can understand they're labels that I've inherited or glommed onto me, and not necessarily me.
All of this reminds me of another story you tell in your books that I listened to. You wrote that one workshop student said, sure, when one door closes, another one opens.
Yeah. The other part of it.
There's a long hallway between those
Right.
doors.
That's right. Yeah. And yeah, and we're all. I think I argue like as a culture, we're right now in that hallway, and what can be born out of this. And I don't know if you don't mind a story
Yeah.
about labels and about this. In my formative years, I'll keep the names out of it. I went to a retreat center where most of the people in this retreat center were very young. Like I think the oldest person was 22, and this is no disrespect. They were from the Midwest, so they didn't have certain exposures. So I was rooming with this guy who he'd never been to the East Coast or the West Coast, and he asked me in all sincerity, no negativity. He said, "Do Jews really have horns?" I said, "As far as I know, I don't think so." So then that night, I'm going back to the bunk where we're bunking, and all of a sudden, like the sky opens up, and I'm experiencing myself standing in the middle of ancient Greece. And I said, "Oh my goodness." And I said, "Well, I better shut up about this because this kid who's rooming with me, like, he's not going to, resonate with this at all." So I went back, went to sleep. In the morning, we got up. He looks at me and he says to me, he says, "Did you ever feel that you were in ancient Greece?"
Oh,
And he had had the same experience that I did.
At the same time.
Yeah.
Wow.
But there was a label in me, and I had a filter in me in such a way that I couldn't imagine that he could have that kind of experience.
Of course not. Wow. That is.
So,
What do you think you guys had like a karmic connection in a way in that moment?
well, I'm sure we did. Otherwise, how did we wind up together?
Yeah.
But also, I when these kind of things happen, I do my best to receive their gift and to speculate as little as possible because who knows? I don't have to know, but I appreciate the fact that we are brought together with people for reasons that we cannot often consciously fathom. Sometimes these people are our own children or parents. This is the first level, like, to work this out. Doesn't Jesus say something about, before you put your gift on the altar, make sure things are okay with your brother, and your sister. This is like the real work. Like we've been taught, if you're successful in the world but a cruel person at home, it's okay. And I don't think that's okay anymore. And I think a lot of people are understanding that who we are is one. We're not one person at work and another person at home. It all, the same soul essence radiates everywhere.
Yeah, we're all so complex and we need to understand that and see everybody with all of their multi layers.
Yeah.
I feel like I have a good window into that because I'm not very political. I'm not a Republican or a Democrat, and yet people always make assumptions about me,
Right.
and so they tend to say things to me that I don't think they would otherwise say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like so I see beyond what they're presenting to me. Yeah, I had a guy come to work on my house, and I don't know, he just made some assumptions about who I was, I guess, and was saying some pretty negative stuff about political things going on in the news, and I just listened. But
Right.
then he moved on to talking about his children and how much he loves his children and how he's taking care of his dad, and I just thought, Samantha, don't label him, don't judge him. Like, we're all doing the best we can. Like your friend said, we're all just walking each other home.
Yeah. Yeah. Indeed. Indeed, he did. Indeed, he did. Indeed.
Another thing you talk about a lot is something you call the Baskin-Robbins syndrome,
Right.
too many choices.
Too many choices. Yeah.
I remember I had a teacher in high school, and she had a Russian exchange student, and this is 1989, so it was right before, communism and everything fell. And so he came to her house for the semester, and the first thing she did was bring him to our big mall.
Right. Oh my God.
She said that they were at the top of the escalator, and he just fell to his knees in tears
hmm
because he was overwhelmed by the choices.
Yeah. Yeah.
That story always stayed with me. And I feel like today we too have so many choices. Gone is the 30-year career where you get the gold watch and the, 401k benefits package. We're told you'll probably change careers every 8 to 10 years or change marriages every 8 to 10 years. There's just choices all around
Right.
us.
Right.
What do people do with that? Do you think that's second chakra work, or do you think that's more fourth chakra work?
I
Or
actually think it's like three,
oh,
two, three, but two, three, four, they all want to align. But I kind of feel with that, it's like we're on the frontier again. We have to reinvent ways to live. And instead of having wild animals out there threatening us, we have all these potentials that are, on one hand, they're great distractions. And on the other hand, some of them might be helpful. So how do you distinguish between what is really there for you and what is a distraction? And I see that as a function of our digestive system. And we digest food and decide what the body needs to keep, but we can do the same thing with information. And if you're going to have strong self-esteem, strong abundance, strong purpose, you need to have a strong digestive fire that can say, okay, that's really cool, but it's not something I need to give my attention to, because my attention is my greatest capital asset. It's the one thing that is mine. And do I want my attention splayed in all directions and controlled by algorithms from this place or that place? So I say that the third chakra is where you make the commitment to your truth and to cultivate your attention instead of selling it out to whomever. That I think is the work, because if you want to, you could live on very little, stay home and channel surf for the rest of your life. There's that much distraction out there, and it's almost an externalization of the discursive mind itself. The mind, or like as they like to say in India, the monkey mind goes swinging from tree to tree, from thought to thought, from object to object, from possibility to possibility, but in the end is nowhere. So the third chakra challenge is this very great phrase for me. Right now in my life, what's important now? And can I commit to it? And when I commit to that, I'm doing my greatest service to humanity, because I'm going to have something to give, something to work with.
Exactly what we all need to hear right now. And one thing that I've noticed, again, talking with people in different cultures, countries, parts of the US, that there is a sense of unity that's never been experienced on the planet before.
Yeah.
And being the eternal optimist or optimistic realist or whatever we want to label it, I think that kindness that you spoke of earlier, if we add in compassion and empathy, that's going to be the key to get on the other side of all of this and really be able to experience something that has never really happened on the planet before. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and it's going to be like a fight to the finish, the race to the finish line. That's how I feel about it, and I'm totally there with you. And I've had this experience myself because I've worked in a lot of different countries, and I find that there is a world culture, underneath all the stuff, and it's much more open and much more accepting and much more diverse. And I think right now the most important way I can see of helping that alignment is recommitting to the Mother Earth, to living on this planet in very visceral ways. Whether it's growing food, whether it's having good materials around you, whether it's not destroying, things that don't have to be destroyed. It seems little, but, people are doing this all over the world.
Causes a ripple effect. Anything that each of us can do to raise our vibration and help someone else raise theirs.
Yeah, and even if it doesn't, my Hilda Charlton, we had, in the old days, we had our own pizza shop. This is how we kept our Sangha alive. And we made, this is way back, we made brown rice knishes and carrot juice and whole wheat pizza. And so we had this nice little business on Broadway in middle of Manhattan, and Hilda would sometimes go out on the street and pick up cigarette butts. And I was once there on the street watching her. She picked up about 20 cigarette butts, and I basically said, I said, Hilda, what good is that going to do? There are like thousands of them on the ground. You know, what good are you doing picking up 20 cigarette butts? And she looked up at me. She said, kid, she said, I'm not picking them up in time. I'm picking them up in eternity. And I'm still working on that one.
Oh,
But I got enough of it to see that it's not necessarily about a three-dimensional cause and effect. It's about any time you do something with that level of compassion, you're bringing the next dimension in.
Mm-hmm.
And you're bringing a dimension that is going to make it possible for more and more people to step through.
it's like that famous starfish story, where the guy says, well, it makes a difference to that one.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's what matters. I think if we look at history, all good things have come out of bad things. Like out of the Revolutionary War, we got this great country. Out of the Civil War, we ended slavery. And if we didn't have the Great Depression, we wouldn't have these social systems in place. Welfare, Medicare, none of that would have existed without the pain of the Great Depression. And
Yeah. So this is following the symptoms. And usually because we are not very sensitive, we have to wait till the symptoms get really bad before we start doing something. But the more you can catch symptoms early, the more you can work on them without having to create a crisis to resolve something.
but it all starts within. And I think that's what the message, if I could be so presumptive, of your work is about, that, you have to cultivate all of that within you first.
What do you mean by that exactly within
Well,
you?
I feel like you can't just go out into the world and be of service without first going inside and understanding how you can be of service to yourself, how you can honor yourself, your worth, your authenticity.
I see. Okay. I mean, right now at this point for me, I see them kind of as non-different, within or without. It to me, it's the same work. What's important is the quality of the vibration. So if I pick up some trash with a high vibration, like I'm putting things back together in the cosmic plan, that to me is non-different than if I'm sitting on my meditation cushion, picking something out of my psyche and putting it in another place. I see the whole thing as the same work.
Oh, that's deep. I know I want to get to that place where I can see that too.
That's what Sarat Kumar was showing me with the garland. That was a big teaching for me. He said, that garland is as important as is it. My first question was, is there fate or free will? And he said, like, how you handle that garland has equal weight. And that was, whoa. That
Wow,
was amazing.
that really is. Wow. Okay. So this has given me even more to think about than all. We so appreciate your time. I really can't express in words how much this means to me having you on the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Thank both of you. It's great work that you're doing. This needs to be done, and I'm happy to be of service. So thank you for thinking of me.
Thank you. And guys, listen to his voice. Is it not heavenly? If you go to rickjarow.com, you can download all of his meditations, all of his books. I just can't speak enough about how life-changing your work has been for me, and I know any of our listeners who haven't encountered your work will feel the same way. So thank you so, so, so much for coming on the show. And to everyone listening, please remember, as always, to show up, do great work, and share your light.
Thank you, Samantha. Thank you, Denise. I
You're
really
welcome.
appreciate it.
Take
Thank you
care.
for your work.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.